When you think of nuclear power, the first words that probably come to mind are words like bad and disaster. And since the most recent nuclear disaster at Fukushima, Japan, nuclear meltdowns, plant explosions, and the release of radioactive material has refocused world attention on the risks of nuclear power and caused many ripple effects, including shifts in public perceptions of the technology. But many of the fears and negative opinions about nuclear power are largely unfounded myths that have become part of the public mindset. Myths like, we get most of our yearly radiation dose from nuclear power plants. The truth is that we are surrounded by naturally occurring radiation 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Only 0.005% of the average American's yearly radiation dose comes from nuclear power. That's 200 times less than what you get during a cross-country flight. Another myth is a nuclear reactor can explode like a nuclear bomb. This is absolutely false. It is impossible for a reactor to explode like a nuclear weapon. These weapons contain very special materials in very particular configurations, neither of which are present in a nuclear reactor. And another myth is that nuclear energy is bad for the environment. The fact is that nuclear reactors emit no greenhouse gases during operation. Over their full lifetimes, they result in comparable emissions to renewable forms of energy such as wind and solar. Nuclear power is one of the most low-carbon energy sources available, and it also has one of the smallest carbon footprints of any energy source. As the reality of global warming has taken the forefront in the environmental issues we face, it is easy to see that nuclear power is an essential response to climate change and greenhouse gas emissions. There is a huge and ongoing demand for electricity globally. Just think about your everyday routine and how much of it depends on energy. It takes enormous amounts of energy to keep powering our homes, workplaces, and cities. But humankind has a responsibility to the planet, so we need to make sure energy sources are low carbon and environmentally friendly. Nuclear power clearly meets these needs and has enough positives to be part of the solution. The overall benefits of nuclear energy are undeniable. Although nuclear power stations take enormous investments to build, their running costs are quite low, and their longevity makes them particularly cost-effective. Uranium is the raw material used to create fuel, and it comes from stable regions around the world and is widely available. This dependability means nuclear power is a long-term, low-carbon solution. In fact, a single uranium fuel pellet, which is about the size of a peanut, can produce as much energy as 800 kilograms of coal. But for all the benefits of nuclear energy, it is important to remember its origins and the ominous task for which it was developed. In 1932, physicist Ernest Rutherford discovered that when lithium atoms were split by protons from a proton accelerator, immense amounts of energy were released in accordance with the principle of mass-energy equivalence. The same year, his doctoral student, James Chadwick, discovered the neutron, which was immediately recognized as a potential tool for nuclear experimentation because of its lack of an electric charge. Experiments bombarding materials with neutrons led Frédéric and Irene Joliot-Curie to discover induced radioactivity in 1934, which allowed the creation of radium-like elements. Further work by Enrico Fermi in the 1930s focused on using slow neutrons to increase the effectiveness of induced radioactivity. Experiments bombarding uranium with neutrons led Fermi to believe he had created a new transuranic element, which was dubbed hesperium. In 1938, German chemists Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann, along with Austrian physicist Lise Meitner and Meitner's nephew Otto Robert Fritsch, conducted experiments with the products of neutron-bombarded uranium as a means of further investigating Fermi's claims. They determined that the relatively tiny neutron split the nucleus of the massive uranium atoms into two roughly equal pieces, contradicting Fermi. This was an extremely surprising result. All other forms of nuclear decay involved only small changes to the mass of the nucleus, whereas this process, dubbed fission, as in reference to biology, involved a complete rupture of the nucleus. Numerous scientists, including Leo Szilard, who was one of the first, recognized that if fission reactions released additional neutrons, a self-sustaining nuclear chain reaction could result. Once this was experimentally confirmed and announced by Frédéric Joliot-Curie in 1939, scientists in many countries, including the United States, the United Kingdom, France, Germany, and the Soviet Union, petitioned their governments for support of nuclear fission research, just on the cusp of World War II, for the development of a nuclear weapon. In the United States, the discovery of the nuclear chain reaction led to the creation of the first man-made reactor, the research reactor known as Chicago Pile 1, which achieved criticality on December 2, 1942. The reactor's development was part of the Manhattan Project, the Allied effort to create atomic bombs during World War II. It led to the building of larger single-purpose production reactors such as the X-10 pile for the production of weapons-grade plutonium for use in the first nuclear weapons. The United States tested the first nuclear weapon in July 1945, the Trinity test, with the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki taking place 1 month later. The Manhattan Project was a research and development undertaking during World War II that produced the first nuclear weapons. It was led by the United States with the support of the United Kingdom and Canada. From 1942 to 1946, the project was under the direction of Major General Leslie Groves of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Nuclear physicist Robert Oppenheimer was the director of the Los Alamos Laboratory that designed the actual bombs. The Army component of the project was designated the Manhattan District. Manhattan gradually superseded the official code name Development of Substitute Materials for the entire project. Along the way, the project absorbed its earlier British counterpart, Tube Alloys. The Manhattan Project began modestly in 1939, but grew to employ more than 130,000 people and cost nearly $2 billion US, about $28 billion today. Over 90% of the cost was for building factories and to produce fissile material, with less than 10% for development and production of the weapons. Research and production took place at more than 30 sites across the United States, the United Kingdom, and Canada. Two types of atomic bombs were developed concurrently during the war: a relatively simple gun-type fission weapon and a more complex implosion-type nuclear weapon. The Thin Man gun-type design proved impractical to use with plutonium, and therefore a simpler gun type called the Little Boy was developed that used uranium-235, an isotope that makes up only 0.7% of natural uranium. Chemically identical to the most common isotope, uranium-238, and with almost the same mass, it proved difficult to separate the two. 3 methods were employed for uranium enrichment: electromagnetic, gaseous, and thermal. Most of this work was performed at the Clinton Engineer Works at Oak Ridge, Tennessee. In parallel with the work on uranium was the effort to produce plutonium, which was discovered at the University of California in 1940. After the feasibility of the world's first artificial nuclear reactor, The Chicago Pile 1 was demonstrated in 1942 at the Metallurgical Laboratory at the University of Chicago. The project designed the X-10 graphite reactor at Oak Ridge and the production reactors at the Hanford site in Washington State, in which uranium was irradiated and transmuted into plutonium. The plutonium was then chemically separated from the uranium using the bismuth phosphate process. The Fat Man plutonium implosion type weapon was developed in a concerted design and development effort by the Los Alamos Laboratory. The first nuclear device ever detonated was an implosion type bomb at the Trinity test, conducted at New Mexico's Alamogordo Bombing and Gunnery Range on 16 July 1945. Little Boy and Fat Man bombs were used a month later in the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, respectively. In the immediate post-war years, the Manhattan Project conducted weapons testing at Bikini Atoll as part of Operation Crossroads, developed new weapons, promoted the development of the network of national laboratories, supported medical research into radiology, and laid the foundations for the nuclear navy. It maintained control over American atomic weapons research and production until the formation of the United States Atomic Energy Commission in January 1947. The real mortality of the atomic bombs that were dropped in Japan will never be known. The destruction and overwhelming chaos made orderly counting impossible. It is not unlikely that the estimates of killed and wounded in Hiroshima, about 150,000, and Nagasaki, an additional 75,000, are over-conservative. The survivors of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki atomic bombings are known in Japan as hibakusha. There are about 48,000 of them living in Nagasaki Prefecture and about 83,000 in Hiroshima. Some were small children when the bombs were dropped, others were young adults. Their average age now is over 80. They were the people who suffered the pain of progress.